The most dangerous person in a hospital is often the one nobody notices. Those words would mean nothing to the staff of Veteran Memorial Medical Center at 2:17 on a cold Thursday morning. At least not yet. Because at that exact moment, every doctor, nurse, technician, and administrator in the building believed they already knew who mattered and who did not. And at the very bottom of that list was Olivia Hayes. If you're enjoying stories like this and want to help support the channel, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support allows us to continue bringing you powerful stories and unforgettable characters, and we'd love to have you join us for future adventures. The intensive care unit hummed with the familiar sounds of monitors, ventilation systems, and exhausted professionals trying to survive another overnight shift. The fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over polished floors while nurses moved from room to room, carrying charts, medications, and cups of coffee that had long since gone cold. Olivia Hayes walked quietly through the corridor in navy blue scrubs, reviewing patient notes on a tablet she had borrowed from the nurse's station. She had worked the night shift for nearly 4 years, yet somehow still managed to remain invisible. Nobody asked for her opinion during meetings. Nobody requested her assistance during major cases. And nobody seemed particularly interested in learning who she was beyond the simple label attached to her badge, registered nurse. Across the ICU, Dr. Nathan Caldwell stood at the center of a group of residents. He was the hospital's celebrated chief of trauma, a man whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his reputation for arrogance. Young doctors admired him. Administrators protected him. Nurses tolerated him. Tonight, however, his patients appeared especially thin. A patient transfer had arrived late. Lab results were missing. Several residents were struggling to keep pace. And Dr. Caldwell was looking for someone to blame. His eyes settled on Olivia Hayes. The single word echoed across the unit. Conversation stopped. Several nurses glanced toward her. Olivia looked up from her tablet. Yes, doctor. Caldwell stepped closer, irritation written across his face. Did you update room 12's records? I submitted them 20 minutes ago. Then why aren't they in the system? Olivia checked the screen. There appears to be a network delay. Caldwell laughed sharply. Of course. There's always an excuse. Several residents shifted uncomfortably. Olivia remained calm. IT has been working on it since midnight. Unbelievable. Caldwell shook his head dramatically. Every shift there's a problem. Every shift somebody has to clean up after you. The corridor fell silent. Even the newer nurses knew what was happening. Olivia had become an easy target. Caldwell pointed toward the nurse's station. Honestly, Hayes, I'm starting to wonder why we keep you here. You're the most useless nurse on a night shift. A few people looked away. Others pretended to focus on their work. Nobody defended her. Olivia simply lowered her eyes and returned to her tablet. The reaction seemed to frustrate Caldwell even more. Before he could continue, a distant vibration rolled through the building. At first it sounded like thunder. Then it grew louder. Several staff members exchanged confused looks. The sound was coming from outside. Through the ICU windows, bright lights suddenly appeared in the darkness beyond the parking structure. Nobody knew it yet, but a military helicopter had just entered the hospital's airspace. And less than 5 minutes later, an unconscious soldier would arrive carrying a mystery that was about to change everything. The vibration grew stronger with each passing second until even the residents clustered around Dr. Caldwell could no longer ignore it. Several staff members drifted toward the ICU windows, trying to identify the source of the noise. Beyond the parking structure, flashing navigation lights cut through the darkness as a military helicopter descended toward the hospital landing pad. Confused whispers spread through the unit. Veteran Memorial occasionally received military patients, but not at 2:23 in the morning and certainly not with this level of urgency. Olivia Hayes barely looked up. She continued updating charts, checking medication schedules, and preparing supplies for the next round of patient assessments. If she noticed the excitement building around her, she gave no indication. Years of overnight shifts had taught her that distractions rarely improved patient care. Within minutes, the emergency department radio crackled to life. A transport coordinator hurried through the hallway, carrying a clipboard. Two security officers followed close behind. The atmosphere changed immediately. Conversations became shorter. Movements became quicker. Even Dr. Caldwell stopped speaking long enough to listen. The coordinator exchanged a few words with hospital administrators before disappearing toward the emergency entrance. Whatever was happening, it had everyone's attention. Everyone except Olivia. She entered room 14, adjusted an elderly patient's blanket, checked his vital signs, and answered questions about a scheduled procedure later that morning. The patient smiled gratefully. Olivia returned the smile and reassured him that everything appeared stable. It was a small interaction, almost invisible compared to the activity unfolding elsewhere in the building. It was exactly the kind of moment that defined her. While others chased recognition, Olivia focused on the people directly in front of her. 10 minutes later, the doors leading from the emergency department burst open. A specialized transport team rolled a patient through the corridor surrounded by military personnel. The man appeared exhausted, his uniform weathered from recent service. Several doctors moved quickly to assist. Dr. Caldwell immediately stepped forward, eager to take control of the situation. Administrators followed close behind. The patient was transferred into an isolated treatment room near the intensive care unit. As physicians began evaluations, an unusual problem emerged. The soldier was conscious, but only barely. He ignored questions about his condition. He ignored requests for information. He refused to focus on names, ranks, or medical history. Instead, he repeated a single word. At first, nobody understood what he was saying. One nurse thought it was a location. Another believed it might be the name of a family member. A resident suggested it could be part of a military operation. The soldier simply repeated it again, and then again, quietly, consistently, like someone holding on to the only thought that mattered. Phoenix. The room fell silent. Phoenix. Dr. Caldwell exchanged a puzzled look with another physician. Phoenix. The word continued to surface every few moments. Nobody knew what it meant. Nobody knew who it referred to. But down the hallway, standing beside a medication cart, Olivia Hayes froze for the briefest fraction of a second before continuing her work as if nothing had happened at all. The strange word spread through the intensive care unit faster than any official update. Within 20 minutes, nearly everyone on the night shift had heard it. Nurses whispered about it at supply stations. Residents discussed it near computer terminals. Even security personnel exchanged theories while monitoring restricted hallways. Nobody seemed capable of explaining why a soldier transported by military helicopter would refuse to answer basic medical questions while repeating a single mysterious name. Dr. Caldwell, however, had little patience for mysteries. He wanted answers, and he wanted them immediately. Standing beside the isolated treatment room, he reviewed preliminary reports while several physicians attempted yet again to establish communication with the patient. The results remained the same. The soldier cooperated with routine evaluations, accepted necessary care, and responded appropriately to simple instructions. Yet whenever anyone asked who should be contacted, who he was looking for, or what had happened before his arrival, he always returned to the same word. Phoenix. One of the younger residents laughed nervously. Maybe it is a code name from some action movie. Another shrugged. Maybe it is a pilot. A nurse suggested it might be a military dog. The theories became increasingly ridiculous as fatigue settled deeper into the overnight shift. Across the room, the soldier remained completely indifferent to their speculation. Dr. Caldwell finally stepped closer. Listen carefully, he said in a measured tone. We are trying to help you. Who is Phoenix? For the first time, the soldier looked directly at him. Several people leaned forward, expecting an explanation. Instead, the man quietly repeated the same word once more. Phoenix. Caldwell exhaled sharply and stepped back. Unbelievable. The resident beside him smirked. At least he is consistent. The comment earned a few tired laughs. Moments later, the group exited into the hallway. The conversation continued. Maybe Phoenix is his girlfriend, or his commander, or his favorite football team. More laughter followed. Then one of the nurses glanced toward Olivia Hayes, who was organizing medication trays several feet away. Maybe she knows, the nurse joked. She looks like she knows everything. A few people chuckled. Olivia continued working without looking up. Another resident joined in. Actually, maybe Phoenix is her secret admirer. More laughter. Someone else added, that would be the biggest surprise in hospital history. The group found that even funnier. Olivia neither smiled nor reacted. She simply checked expiration dates, updated inventory records, and moved to the next task. Her silence encouraged them. People often mistook her calmness for weakness. Dr. Caldwell noticed the exchange and shook his head dismissively. Trust me, he said. Olivia Hayes barely knows what is happening in her own unit. She is not solving military mysteries. The residents laughed again, yet none of them noticed what happened next. As Olivia reached for a medication container, her hand paused for less than a second. The interruption was so brief that most people would never have seen it. Then she continued working exactly as before. Down the hallway, inside the treatment room, the soldier suddenly opened his eyes and stared toward the doorway. His voice was barely above a whisper. Phoenix is here. The word spread through the hallway almost immediately. Nobody could explain why the soldier had suddenly become alert enough to make such a specific statement, and nobody could explain how he could possibly know who was standing outside his room. The charge nurse reviewed the chart again. The transport paperwork contained no references to hospital personnel. No names had been shared. No staff introductions had taken place. Yet somehow the soldier seemed absolutely certain. Inside the treatment room, he turned his head toward the doorway and repeated the statement with greater clarity. Phoenix is here. The resident nearest the bed exchanged a confused look with another physician. Who is he talking about? Nobody answered. Dr. Caldwell stepped forward. Can you identify Phoenix? The soldier remained silent for several seconds. Then he slowly looked toward the hallway beyond the partially open door. The movement caught everyone's attention. Several staff members instinctively followed his gaze. Standing 30 feet away beside a medication cart was Olivia Hayes. She was reviewing dosage schedules with the same calm concentration she applied to every task. She appeared completely unaware that half the intensive care unit was now looking in her direction. One of the residents laughed. No way. Another shook his head. That does not even make sense. Dr. Caldwell folded his arms. Enough. We're not turning this into some ridiculous guessing game. Yet the uncertainty remained. The soldier's vital signs had improved noticeably during the last 20 minutes. The improvement was not dramatic enough to create alarm, but it was obvious enough to attract attention. A nurse quietly pointed it out to a physician. Another nurse confirmed the observation. Something had changed. Nobody understood why. A few minutes later, Olivia entered the treatment room, carrying routine medications requested by the overnight team. She approached the bedside with her usual professionalism. Good morning, she said gently. I am Olivia. I'm going to check a few things. The reaction was immediate. The tension that had been visible on the soldier's face seemed to disappear. His breathing became more even. His eyes focused clearly for the first time since arriving at the hospital. Several people in the room noticed. One resident actually looked down at the monitor twice to make sure he was not imagining it. Olivia continued her work without drawing attention to herself. She checked readings, reviewed notes, and asked a few standard questions. The soldier answered more than he had answered anyone else all night. Not much, but enough to surprise the entire room. How are you feeling? Olivia asked. Better. The response was quiet but unmistakable. Dr. Caldwell stared at the patient. 10 minutes earlier, he had barely answered direct questions. Now he was cooperating. The chief physician stepped closer. Why are you responding to her? The soldier looked at him briefly before returning his attention to Olivia. Then he spoke 5 words that caused the room to fall silent once again. Because she was always there. Nobody understood what that meant. Nobody except Olivia. For the first time all night, a shadow crossed her expression. It lasted less than a second before disappearing completely. But someone noticed. Standing near the doorway, a military officer who had arrived with the transport team watched her very carefully. The military officer remained near the doorway long after everyone else returned to their duties. Unlike the doctors and administrators surrounding him, he was not interested in hospital politics or overnight staffing schedules. He was watching Olivia Hayes. More specifically, he was watching her reaction, yet she gave him almost nothing to work with. She collected equipment, updated records, and moved quietly between patient rooms exactly as she had before. If the soldier's unusual behavior affected her at all, she concealed it perfectly. The officer finally stepped into the hallway and spoke softly into a secure phone. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Whatever was said immediately changed the atmosphere around him. He ended the call, straightened his posture, and returned to the treatment room. Inside, the soldier appeared stronger than before. Not fully recovered, but noticeably improved. His eyes tracked movement. His responses were clearer. The medical team could not explain the sudden progress. Dr. Caldwell disliked unexplained things. He reviewed charts repeatedly, searching for a clinical reason. When he found none, his frustration grew. "This makes no sense," he muttered. One of the residents glanced toward Olivia. "Maybe she has some kind of connection to him." Caldwell scoffed immediately. "Olivia Hayes does not have connections to anyone important." The comment earned a few nervous smiles. Yet nobody laughed as confidently as before. Too many strange things had already happened. Shortly before 3 o'clock in the morning, another message arrived from hospital security. The information traveled quickly through administration offices before reaching the intensive care unit. Additional military personnel were on their way. Nobody knew why. Nobody knew who had requested them. The only certainty was that the situation was growing larger. The officer, standing guard near the soldier, received confirmation moments later. He looked at his watch and nodded. Then he asked a question that surprised everyone nearby. "Where is Nurse Hayes now?" A resident pointed toward the nurse's station. The officer thanked him and walked away. Several people exchanged puzzled looks. Why would military personnel be looking for Olivia? The question lingered unanswered. At the nurse's station, Olivia was reviewing medication schedules when she sensed someone approaching. She looked up. The officer stopped a respectful distance away. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then he asked quietly, "Have we met before?" Olivia's expression remained calm. "I do not believe so." The officer studied her face carefully. Something about her answer seemed to confirm a suspicion rather than dismiss it. "Interesting," he said. "Very interesting." Before Olivia could respond, footsteps echoed from the elevator lobby. Multiple security officers suddenly appeared, followed by senior administrators who rarely enter the hospital at this hour. The entire corridor seemed to straighten. Conversation stopped. Monitors continued beeping, but human voices vanished. The officer turned toward the elevators. His eyes widened slightly. A moment later, the doors opened. A distinguished man, wearing the insignia of a Marine brigadier general, stepped into the hallway. The military officer immediately came to attention. Hospital administrators stepped aside. Even Dr. Caldwell fell silent. Brigadier General Marcus Reed had arrived. He surveyed the intensive care unit once before speaking. His voice was calm, but carried enough authority to command the entire floor. "I was informed someone here mentioned a call sign." His gaze moved across the room. "Tell me exactly who said Phoenix." For several seconds, nobody answered. The question seemed to drain the remaining noise from the intensive care unit. Doctors stopped typing. Nurses paused in the middle of conversations. Even the administrators, standing near the elevators, appeared uncertain about how to respond. Brigadier General Marcus Reed waited patiently. He was not a man who needed to repeat himself. Finally, Dr. Caldwell stepped forward. "The patient has been repeating the word since he arrived." Reed turned toward him. "The word. Phoenix." Something changed in the general's expression. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the military personnel surrounding him noticed immediately. Reed looked toward the treatment room. "How many times?" "Dozens," Caldwell replied. "We assumed it was a code name, or perhaps someone he knows." Reed remained silent. Then he asked a question nobody expected. Did he react to anyone on staff? The room grew uncomfortable. Several people exchanged glances. One resident finally spoke. Actually, yes. Reed shifted his attention toward him. Explain. He responded better when Nurse Hayes entered the room. The general's eyes narrowed slightly. Nurse Hayes? Several heads turned toward Olivia, who stood near the nurse's station reviewing medication records. She looked as calm as ever, as though none of the attention concerned her. Reed studied her from across the corridor. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he started walking. The entire hallway seemed to move aside automatically. Administrators stepped back. Security officers cleared a path. Doctors watched with growing confusion as one of the most senior military officers they had ever encountered crossed the intensive care unit floor with complete focus. Olivia looked up as he approached. Nurse Hayes? Reed asked. Yes, sir. The answer came naturally, almost automatically. Several people noticed the wording. Most civilians would have said general or simply answered yes. Olivia's response sounded different somehow. Reed noticed too. How long have you worked here? Almost 4 years. Before that, Olivia met his gaze calmly. Other hospitals. The answer was technically correct and completely unhelpful. Reed continued watching her. Around them, the hallway had become remarkably quiet. Everyone sensed that something important was happening, even if nobody understood what it was. Have you ever heard the call sign Phoenix? He asked. Several staff members leaned forward. The question felt enormous. Olivia's expression never changed. I have heard many things over the years, sir. Reed did not smile, but something very close to respect appeared in his eyes. Before he could continue, a military aide approached carrying a secured tablet. General, we received confirmation. Reed accepted the device. As he reviewed the information, his posture became noticeably more rigid. The aide lowered his voice. The records match. Reed stared at the screen for several seconds. Then he slowly looked back toward Olivia. Across the room, Dr. Caldwell folded his arms impatiently. None of this made sense to him. As far as he was concerned, Olivia Hayes was an average night nurse who happened to be standing in the wrong place during an unusual night. Yet the expression on the general's face suggested something entirely different. Reed handed the tablet back to his aide and spoke quietly enough that only a few people nearby could hear. Lock down all personnel records related to this investigation. Effective immediately. The aide nodded. Dr. Caldwell stepped forward. General, what exactly is going on? Reed turned toward him. Doctor, I believe your hospital has been employing someone whose history is considerably more complicated than anyone realized. Then he looked back at Olivia. And for the first time that night, Olivia Hayes seemed genuinely concerned. Olivia Hayes had spent years ensuring that nobody asked questions about her past. She had chosen night shifts because they were quieter. She had avoided promotions because they attracted attention. She had never discussed where she learned certain skills, why she remained calm during emergencies, or why military veterans often seemed unusually comfortable around her. Until this moment, those choices had worked perfectly. Now Brigadier General Marcus Reed was standing less than 10 feet away, and the look in his eyes told her that the wall she had built around her former life was beginning to crack. The intensive care unit remained frozen in uneasy silence. Staff members pretended to work, but nobody was actually paying attention to charts or medications. Everyone was watching the exchange. Reed took a slow breath. Nurse Hayes, he said quietly, when was the last time you used that call sign? Several residents exchanged confused looks. Dr. Caldwell immediately stepped forward. General, are you suggesting she actually has some connection to this? Reed did not answer right away. Instead, he continued watching Olivia. I asked a question. Olivia lowered her eyes briefly. A long time ago, the admission hit the room like a thunderclap. Several nurses stared openly. One resident nearly dropped his tablet. Dr. Caldwell looked genuinely stunned. You know what Phoenix means? Olivia remained calm. I know what it used to mean. Reed nodded slowly. The response appeared to confirm something important. He turned toward the military aide. Bring me the archived file. The aide immediately left. Dr. Caldwell could no longer hide his frustration. Somebody needs to explain what is happening. Reed finally faced him. Very well, doctor. The general's voice carried across the hallway. Approximately 8 years ago, a military medical specialist disappeared from active service. Officially, she resigned. Unofficially, she became something of a legend. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Reed continued. During multiple overseas deployments, that specialist repeatedly accomplished things that should not have been possible. Entire teams credited her with bringing them home. Service members requested assignments with her. Commanders trusted her judgment. Eventually, her call sign became known throughout several units. He paused. That call sign was Phoenix. The hallway became perfectly still. Dr. Caldwell looked from Reed to Olivia and back. Again, that is impossible. Reed almost smiled. The word impossible has had a difficult history whenever this individual was involved. At that moment, the military aide returned carrying a secure folder. Reed opened it and removed a photograph. He studied it briefly before handing it to Dr. Caldwell. The chief physician looked down. The color immediately drained from his face. The woman in the picture was younger, but unmistakable. The same eyes, the same posture, the same calm expression. Olivia Hayes. Several military decorations were visible on the uniform she wore. Around her stood a group of smiling service members. Across the bottom of the photograph, a handwritten message read, "To Phoenix. Thank you for bringing us home." Dr. Caldwell stared at the image in disbelief. The nurse he had called useless only hours earlier suddenly seemed like someone he had never truly known. Across the room, inside the treatment suite, the recovering soldier opened his eyes. A faint smile appeared on his face. "Told you," he whispered softly. She was always there. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The photograph continued moving from hand to hand among the stunned staff members, and each person who looked at it seemed to arrive at the same conclusion. The quiet nurse they had overlooked for years was not who they thought she was. The realization spread through the intensive care unit like a wave. Nurses who had worked beside Olivia for years suddenly remembered small details they had ignored. The way she remained calm during emergencies. The way veterans trusted her almost instantly. The way she always seemed to notice problems before anyone else. None of it felt ordinary anymore. Brigadier General Marcus Reed allowed the silence to settle before speaking again. "Most people only know the stories," he said. "Very few ever meet the person behind them." His eyes remained on Olivia. There were operations where communication failed, equipment failed, and plans failed. Yet somehow people still came home. When those service members were later asked what happened, many of them gave the same answer. They said Phoenix happened. Several military personnel standing nearby nodded. Quietly, this was not new information to them. They had heard versions of these stories for years. Dr. Caldwell looked completely overwhelmed. He glanced at Olivia as though seeing her for the first time. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Olivia answered without hesitation. "Because I came here to be a nurse." The simplicity of the response made the room even quieter. Reed smiled faintly. "That sounds exactly like you." One of the younger residents finally found the courage to speak. "You walked away from all of that?" Olivia considered the question. "I finished one chapter of my life and started another." No dramatic speech. No attempt to impress anyone. Just a simple answer. That seemed to affect the room more than any military record could. Reed turned toward the treatment suite where the recovering soldier rested. "Do you know why he kept asking for you?" Olivia looked toward the room. "I have a feeling." Reed nodded. "He served under people who served with you. Your name became part of unit history. When he recognized you after arriving here, he knew he was safe." Across the hallway, several staff members lowered their eyes. Earlier that same night, they had laughed when the mysterious call sign was mentioned. Now the mystery no longer felt amusing. It felt important. Dr. Caldwell slowly handed the photograph back to the general. His confidence had disappeared entirely. The memory of calling Olivia useless only hours earlier seemed impossible to escape. Reed accepted the photograph and looked around the intensive care unit. "You all believed you were looking at an ordinary nurse." He paused. "The truth is much simpler. You were looking at an extraordinary person who never asked for recognition." The words landed heavily. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. Attention had never been something she wanted. Yet there was no escaping it now. Then something unexpected happened. One of the senior nurses stepped forward. "Olivia," she said quietly, "thank you." Another nurse nodded. Then another. The acknowledgments spread naturally through the room. Not because of military history. Not because of stories from the past. Because everyone suddenly realized how much she had already done for them without ever asking for credit. And standing in the center of it all, Olivia Hayes looked more uncomfortable receiving praise than she ever had receiving criticism. By 4:30 in the morning, the atmosphere inside Veteran Memorial Medical Center felt completely different from the one that had existed only a few hours earlier. The whispers were gone. The jokes had disappeared. Even the usual overnight fatigue seemed less noticeable. People moved through the intensive care unit with a new sense of awareness, as though they had collectively realized they had overlooked something important for a very long time. Olivia Hayes continued working exactly as she always had. She checked patient charts. She answered call lights. She reviewed medication schedules. Nothing about her behavior suggested that her life had changed, yet everyone around her knew that it had. Inside the treatment suite, the recovering soldier had improved enough to sit upright and speak comfortably with the medical staff. Brigadier General Marcus Reed entered the room shortly before sunrise and spent several minutes speaking with him privately. When he emerged, he walked directly toward Olivia. The hallway became quiet once again. Reed stopped in front of her and held her gaze. "There is something I should have done years ago," he said. Olivia immediately shook her head. "General, that is not necessary." Reed smiled slightly. "That sounds exactly like the person I remember." Then, in full view of the doctors, nurses, administrators, and military personnel gathered throughout the corridor, he stood at attention. The gesture caught everyone by surprise. A moment later, the recovering soldier appeared at the doorway of his room. He straightened as much as his condition allowed and mirrored the general's posture. One by one, the military personnel accompanying them followed. Nobody had been instructed to do so. Nobody needed to be. The respect came naturally. Olivia looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Please do not do this." Reed answered softly. "You spent years making sure others came home safely. The least we can do is say thank you." The silence that followed felt different. From every silence earlier that night, it was no longer confusion. It was respect. Across the hallway, Dr. Nathan Caldwell stood motionless. The memory of his words echoed painfully in his mind. Useless nurse. He had said it in front of everyone. He had believed it. Now he understood how wrong he had been. Slowly, he stepped forward. Every eye turned toward him. "Olivia," he began, his voice unusually quiet. "I owe you an apology." She looked at him calmly. "Doctor, you do not owe me anything." "Yes," he replied. "I do." He took a breath. "I judged you without knowing you. Worse than that, I judged you without trying to know you. I was wrong." No dramatic confrontation followed. No humiliation. No revenge. Olivia simply nodded. Apology accepted. That simple response somehow made the moment even more powerful. As sunlight began to appear beyond the hospital windows, the overnight shift prepared to end. Nurses gathered their things. Residents completed reports. The ordinary rhythm of hospital life slowly